Hello and welcome to episode 3 of this Let's Play SpaceX Factorio series. Yeah, I got that the wrong way around. In the last episode, we kind of dealt with a whole lot of factory processes, a whole lot of what I would call like bulk factory processes. You know, big processes, chunky things that need a lot of space in the factory, but we can't really progress to the next level without them. So if we take a look at the map, you know, in the first episode we dealt with the stuff on the left hand side, you know, started down here, and then on the last episode we built all of this stuff, and now what I want to do is I want to move the camera up here, potentially lose this uranium. Yeah, the base has got a little bit bigger than I anticipated, but move the camera up here and start constructing the shopping mall. Because I really want to start using these materials for some useful, productive processes. You know, I want this stuff to go somewhere. There's what's the point of building a factory if none of this material is being used? So, that's what I'm going to do. And we're going to do it right now. Well now, that's a mighty big block. Mighty big block. There are some times when I'm playing this game where I have a task, I have a space I need to fill, and I just build away, and then when I've finished it, I take a step back and I look back and I'm like, oh, that's big, that's a monster. And another thing I liked, this is another thing that goes through my head, it's like, if you imagine all of this space is just the bits for the conveyor belts. I reckon that space is about the same as the space that's required for the actual assembly machines, the bits that are doing the real job. There's quite a medley of ingredients. But, you know, to be honest, it's really not all that many inputs. You know, these are basically all of the inputs that this block needs. Everything else are the outputs. There's like this is creating like a dozen little different things that I'm going to need. So, in terms of the factory, you know, what I feel like I've been dealing with up until this point is what I've been terming like the bulk. It's like donkey work. It's like the bare essentials that the factory needs to be able to get to the next stage, or at least, you know, these are all things we're going to need long term. And this is kind of what I feel like the same. This is like the donkey work that's needed for the shopping mall. So none of this is really necessary in vanilla, but all of it becomes necessary as part of Factorio. I don't know how much of it's part of SpaceX. Anyway, so let's go through it. At the end, we've got single cylinder engines, fancy kind of engines. Let me just check. I can't remember what it's called. Multi-cylinder engine. Right. So this goes to a few places, but nothing critical. So I just need some of it. Don't need all that much. Then we've got this fancy kind of engine. Forgotten what this one's called also. Let's see if I can find it. Nope. Here we go. Big electric motor. Nice. Okay. Yeah, so that's what this is doing. And then we've got the normal electric motor. I'll go through this in a bit more detail. My thinking. This is the normal engine, automation core, iron rod, copper cable, iron gears. That would be imersite gears, steel gears, iron beams, more copper cables, imersite beams, and then steel beams. Just a whole load of really useful things. Just lovely stuff. And in terms of, someone asked me in the comments, how do I figure out, what do I base all of this stuff on? I'm building very specific sets of assembly machines. Where is these targets coming from? And I'm just following the maths through. I'm creating a certain amount of iron, copper, and steel. Primarily, that's what's going into this block. And I'm just choosing to spend as much of it as I can in this block. Really, there's going to be a point in time where any one of these number of things could be critical, and not much of the rest of the factory is working. And it might be that I just need more iron gears at any one time. So I want to have a maximum amount that I can squeeze out. The thing that always comes to mind is conveyor belts, because when I build the factory, I base everything on 45 items a second. I'm basing it all on the blue conveyor belts. And so at some point in the future, I'm going to have to come around and I have to upgrade like everything. Like, it's going to take hours to upgrade everything, but it's necessary to get the factory to the point where it's producing what I want it to be producing. But for those few hours, I need just an absolute boatload of blue conveyor belts. And I want the factory at that moment to be doing nothing else but put in as much resources into those blue conveyor belts as possible. I want to be creating as much, nothing else in the factory is going to be progressing. I'm not going to be researching anything. I'm not going to be building anything. I'm going to be just upgrading stuff. And at that moment, for that 4 or 5 hour period, I don't know, however long it takes, I want the maximum amount of conveyor belts. And it might only be 4 or 5 hour period, but that's only because at that point, and I've done it before, and I'm saying this because I've done it before, the factory will be producing the maximum amount of blue conveyor belts. I've had factories before where I haven't had this approach, and this 4 or 5 hour period where I'm upgrading stuff has stretched into a much longer stretch of time because I'm having to wait for the factory to produce these damn things. And it's so frustrating to me. I like to see these factories as like a bit of a Swiss Army knife. We aren't just designing something to do SPM. We aren't designing something to just launch rockets. We're also designing it to do a multitude of other things. And there might be occasions where some parts of the factory are working and functioning and other parts aren't on because we aren't using the things that those processes are producing. And we want the maximum amount of those things that we actually need. And so that's the way I've tried to approach this block. Is I've tried to spend, that's how I kind of think of it in my mind. I've got a certain amount of iron, copper and steel that I can spend, a maximum amount. Let's try and spend it in as many of these areas as I can, just to get as much out of it as is possible. Anyway, that's kind of the approach that this whole factory is. Whenever I'm approaching these big sets of mods, that's the general approach. I've got a set of numbers. And we've got a chain of factory processes, and I don't want any one chain to be bigger than the thing one of the ingredients. If I'm producing a certain amount of, hydrogen and chlorine, I don't want to have more hydrogen chloride. If I'm producing, say, 1,000 hydrogen, I don't want to set up a set of factory processes that uses 2,000 hydrogen to produce hydrogen chloride. That makes no sense. There's a limit. There's a progression, a degression, I suppose. You've got the big stuff at the beginning, and as you work your way down the chain, those processes need to get a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller, depending on what it is, with a maximum limit of what any of those can be achieved. Of back to those, what am I producing? Iron, copper, steel, computer chips. The bare essentials. All of this donkey work stuff. Yeah, anyway. When you're dealing with a base that takes hundreds of hours to build, you think about a lot of stuff, and people ask questions, and it sets your mind off, and you can't really, I can't really get rid of that thought process until I've let it out in some way, or at least now I can't. Now that I've got this platform, not that I like to call it that. Anyway, next things. So I want to turn all this on. I want to start producing these, obviously, because this is where we are with the time lapse. This would be a good moment to put the materials in, have that nice set piece, and then I want to move up on the map to this part here. Now, the next few stages in the shopping mall are not going to be this big. They're going to be much, much smaller, so I need to generate a smaller block size. And I'm also looking at these big buses that I've created, and I want to try and introduce some confinement. I want to start producing like small, tight little parts of factory. So the plan is to start arranging stuff in like vertical columns. So I'm going to have maybe, 3 vertical columns here, maybe 4, depending on how well I can squeeze stuff out. and then a horizontal bus along here along the top, which will feed these processes. And I'll do the same above, so we'll have 3 or 4 blocks above, and this big bus of things will feed those processes. And hopefully by teeing everything off down this middle, I'll be able to have this nice, tight, confined shape in here. That's the idea. There's a lot of things to get in here. I want to get started on conveyor belts. I always want to get started on conveyor belts. So let's get cracking. Alright, so I'm just going to hold the moment of ultimate satisfaction back from you for just a moment. You're probably looking at the factory full of ingredients, you know, wondering where was our moment? Where did we see it fill up? And the reason is because what I wanted to transition between a slightly closer in and zoom out so that I covered all of this shopping mall whilst introducing the ingredients. Now, I've tried this a few times in the past and it's always gone wrong for me. Not necessarily wrong. It's always just worked out in a way that I didn't really like. You know, I wanted a certain appearance, and it never gave me that appearance. So, for this one, what I decided to do was try out a few different ways. So I've got 3 different ways that I filled up this factory, and I want to show you them one by one and take you through my thoughts on how it's going. So here's version number 1. So this one, my thoughts are that, number 1, the materials are being introduced too quickly. I mean, that's just a case of the frame rate being too low. And also I start zooming out too late. Like, it feels like by the time I've zoomed out, everything has already happened in the factory. What it also demonstrates, this whole process actually started a kind of a problem-solving effort. You know, it really kind of highlighted some of the issues. It was a bit of a shakedown on the factory and what it was capable of doing. And what it did was showed me that some of the coal wasn't quite going to my steam turbines in the right way, and I'd immediately run out of power. So before I set up the second transition, I rerouted the coal so it was going to the right places, so that should mean I should have enough power. And then I kind of tried to correct some of the errors from the first version. So let's have a look at this one. So overall better, much happier with the rate that everything is happening. Now, my problem with this one was that at this point we're just kind of introducing materials slowly. I was just kind of too slowly, and I think my thought was, although I want to introduce those elements slowly to begin with, what I want to do is I want to, once when we're zooming out, I want it to be a flood. So that was the one thing that I wanted to change. The frame rates I was generally happy with. But as part of this shakedown, I immediately ran out of power again. And so what I had to do, I've had to run around and make a whole load of new steam power. So this was my original steam power. I've got doubled it over here. And then I've also added another same again over here. So I've tripled the power that I have. So that should, theoretically, give me more than enough power to turn all this stuff on. Also, it showed me watching back the time lapse and figuring stuff out. I hadn't actually run any power to the top half of the factory. You know, I hadn't. You know, I've got all these lanes for where the power poles need to go, and I hadn't done that. So I did that as well. So we've got the upgrade to the power, and we've got actual power delivered to everything now. So everything is switched on. Let's have a look at the third version. Yeah, and I am much happier. That looks perfect to me. That's worked out really, really well. I'm going to keep that one. So that's where we are. That's how we arrived here with the factory full of stuff. But we also, I mean, that time lapse that we watched building all of this part of the factory, that's, you know, what was it, a minute? Probably about 90 seconds of time lapse. I mean, it's tens of hours of actual building. And we got a lot of really, really useful stuff here. But I want to tell you the story kind of backwards from the way I built it. So the first thing I want to talk about is the main bus. And from outside viewing, this bus might just look like, I mean, it is a bit of a mess. But it might look like that I've positioned that all of this stuff is random. But it isn't really. You know, I've got a strategy, I've got a philosophy when it comes to building these buses. And although I've made things difficult for myself, you know. What I've got is these two parts of the shopping mall, and I've got the bus running down the middle. It would have been much, much easier for me if I'd had these kind of units for the shopping mall, bring in the ingredients down, and then built these units, and then brought those units down as well. It would have been made things much easier for myself, but, you know, this is the picture that I had in my head. And, you know, difficult challenges are kind of what I like to take on. So when I'm building buses like this, my prime concern, the one thing that I'm worried about is a belt up here coming and feeding something in the bottom half of this shopping mall, and another belt from down in the bus coming up in exactly the same layer so that they have to intertwine. Now, it's not necessarily a problem because we can fix it. We can intertwine the conveyor belts. That's not necessarily with the underground belts. We can run them underneath each other. It is a little bit more difficult with where we are at the moment because we've only got yellow and red. So it is tricky to get it done. But I want to avoid that scenario as much as possible because it has the potential to just create complete havoc as at this stage with the red and the yellow conveyor belts. That, you know, intertwining conveyor belt, it just becomes a mess, an absolute nightmare. So I'm trying to avoid that scenario at all costs. So when I laid this factory down, let's go back to the shopping mall itself. When I laid down the factory, I built the bottom half, but I wanted to find out where all of these conveyor belts were going for the top half. You know, in order to build this bus, in order to be able to design it, I needed to know which ingredients were going where, in what order, and exactly what position, so that I could position these splitters in all the right places. So I built the factory in the place where the shopping mall was going to go, so that I could make all my notes and write down. I've got huge lists of all of these ingredients, by the way. So I can make all those lists where they were going to go, so that I could plan out this bus. And then once I've got those lists of ingredients, I can plan out where their position in this bus, because what I'm trying to achieve, that ultimate aim. I'm trying to prevent belts from coming in two different directions in the same kind of in the same tile. So what I want to do, the first things I want to deal with the bus, I mean, this is where I started building the bus, was down in this corner. I want to deal with the things that are kind of unique ingredients or things that only feed things in the bottom half of the factory. You know, once I get those ones out of the way, that's a whole lot of potential belts that are only going to one or a few places in this south half of the shopping mall. And that removes the potential for them to clash with other belts. So that's what I've got here. I think all of these belts are unique ingredients that only go to this south part of the shopping mall. So that's a whole lot of stuff I don't have to worry about. The next kind of layer to the bus is kind of this stage here. So I'm producing multiple belts of the same ingredient in the factory. I've got 4 belts of iron, I've got 4 belts of copper. So it kind of makes sense to split that into 2 batches and put 2 belts of iron that deals with the south half of the shopping mall and 2 belts of iron which deal with the north half of the shopping mall. So that's what I've got here. And I've done the same with copper, which I've got 4 of. I've done the same with glass, which I've got 2 belts of glass, I've got 2 belts of green chips. So I've got a belt of green chips that feeds the top half of the factory here, a belt of green chips that feeds the bottom half of the factory. If we go to the top half, then we've got, these are all the ingredients which are just feeding the top half of the factory. These are kind of the unique ingredients that just come as part of this. So once we've dealt with all of that stuff, we're left with maybe a dozen, 15, 20 ingredients which have the potential to intertwine with each other. So I've dealt with maybe 60% of the bus by the time I've reached a point where, okay, this is where things might potentially collide. Now, I haven't quite achieved the aim, the ultimate aim. I think there's 3 or 4 of these belts that intertwine with each other, and that's not ideal, but I've done the best that I can. You know, the idea of once you find one of these collisions, the idea of working the way back in the bus, there's a huge sunk cost fallacy. You know, anyway, once I found them, I was like, I'll just accept them now. And 3 or 4, that's an acceptable amount for this kind of medley of ingredients. I mean, this is a whole mess of stuff. So let's go through the factory itself. We've got down here is conveyor belts, underground belts, loaders, and splitters. And I like treating this as a puzzle, and I have a particular approach. And the approach is to kind of deal with it in a kind of a grid system. So we've got all of the conveyor belts in increasing speed on the left hand side, and then as we work our way across to the right, we've got the things that are associated with these belts. So we've got underground belts, loaders and splitters for the yellow belts, and then we've got red belts, and then we've got the underground belts, loaders and splitters for the reds, etc., etc. It's worked out a whole lot less elegantly than usual. You know, in vanilla terms, most of the conveyor belts is mostly just iron, and it's relatively elegant. We've got a whole lot of other stuff that needs to come in here, but you know, it's there. I've done it. It's done now. I don't need to worry about it. We've also got inserters. So we've got all of the main inserters that we have access to at the moment here, and then these are the 4 different kind of inserters which we'll get access to potentially at some point in the future. You can see that we need 5 different ingredients, I think, for these, and I've got none of them. You know, we're nowhere near any of that. Assembly machines. So we've got all of the main assembly machines here, and then space assembly machines here. So these are kind of a separate process, and these go to a few different areas. We might need them to make other blocks and units and stuff. So this kind of comes out and feeds other places. I think this is the space manufactory. You know, it needs one of these. It makes sense to put it this part in the factory. And we got kind of power stuff, chemical plants, refineries, some basic units, greenhouses, electrolysis, filtration plants, pipes, valves, fuel refineries, pulverizer, oil refinery, oil pump jack, you know, all robot ports, just a whole lot of stuff that's useful that I'm going to need. Then we have batteries and robots. So this is pretty critical. I want this, like, right now, I want robots in my life. That would be nice to have when that's ready. I mean, how many have I got at the moment? I've got 1. Oh, they're all going to logistic robots, aren't they? So let's stop that right now. Okay. Now, that's the bottom half of the factory. If we work our way to the top. Up here, we've got concrete. Reinforced concrete, some other type of reinforced concrete, walls, all of the train stuff. So I've got trains and stuff. Then we got ammo, and all of this stuff's useful. And yeah, all of this stuff's super useful. I don't know how much detail you want me to go in. Turrets, artillery down here. I've got meteor defense. They're ready to go here. Once I've unlocked it, and I've got a few, I've got enough power, I suppose. Mind you, I've just built a whole load of... I might be alright with that now. I might be able to set that up. And then we've got mining drills, steam turbine, not steam turbine, the basic turbine, steam engine, then the turbine, then the condensing steam turbine. Man, there's a lot of stuff here to remember. Condenser turbine, I was right, okay. Accumulators, solar panels, furnaces. Oh, that should do you. Okay. What are you? I can't remember what you're called. Boiler. Heat exchanger. Heat pipe. Nuclear power plant. Centrifuge. And that's everything at the moment. Obviously, there's a whole load of gaps. I've got a whole block here that I've got, I'm thinking in my mind that there's going to be some more complicated ammo types, some more complicated turrets. I mean, yes, I've got a little bit of space here, but that's not really space that I can feed any ingredients into. So it's nice to have some space for that. Shopping mall, there's going to be more stuff, but I don't really know where I'm going to put it just yet. So that's the shopping mall, and it's been a battle. I'm not going to lie. But it's a pleasing conclusion to that battle. Definitely. Yeah, I forgot I don't have any electronic components in the base yet, so I needed that for robots. Okay, so at this point, what I really want to do is I want to set up I want to have some armor. Now, I'm not going to get any exoskeletons just yet. I've come to that. That I need further science, which I don't have yet. Yeah. But I think I should be able to have some robots with some power and some batteries, and that should get me enough to see me through. I want to start repairing stuff. A solar flare hit me, and it completely obliterated the top half of my oil. It's not too bad, because I just switched on the bottom half, but I want this fixed and sorted. I mean, I need a whole load of stuff. I need to pipe all of this. Potentially even add some solar panels. I think I need to start conserving some of this coal. A whole load of things. And still, I really need to get to rocket launches so I can move on to the next thing. But I can't really do that until I've sorted out everything else. Anyway, so just maybe a whole load of little things from here, really, to be honest. Let's get on with it. So we are just waiting for all of these ingredients to fill up to a level so that when I set them going, something can actually be seen on the time lapse. This is probably not the most usual standard. So, this is not the way that most people probably play the game. Most people probably build the factory and then flood it with whatever materials they have available. This is one of the consequences of time lapsing. But while that's filling up, let's have a chat about the factory, because this is not where I was anticipating being at this stage. After I finished the shopping mall, what I thought was going to happen was I was just going to potter around and, fix little bits and pieces, maybe repair a whole load of this damage that I've got from meteors. But that's not really what happened. So I got my robots, I went over to oil to try and repair the damage that was caused by the solar flare, and almost immediately I started getting attacked by biters. And not attacks in just knocking on the door, they want to come in. It was like attacks like they wanted to kick the door down. It was persistent and rampant. And turning on that shopping mall has actually made a lot of these processes that I've already built have a purpose. So, whereas before we were only trying to fill conveyor belts with the amount of iron, say for example, now we were feeding a whole lot of iron beams and iron gears and conveyor belts. And those things, thousands of conveyor belts, that's going to go on forever. So switching on the shopping mall has really created this whole heap of noise and created a whole lot of attention that I didn't really want. I like my peace and my peace and my quiet when I'm building this stuff. And whilst I was repairing that oil setup, that was the opposite of what I wanted. So, they were mostly they were attacking over here. Let's have a look. I think what's happening is that there's a part of land in here which I haven't uncovered yet. There's a whole lot of biters in there, and the only way that because they're getting attracted by this noise and they're coming round. That's the only way that I can see that this is the cause of where they're coming from. But when I was over here repairing my oil, attack my base, so they would come over here, attack my base, and defeat a few gun turrets. So I'd run over here. It takes a few minutes to get over here, and then I'd be attacked down here. And so I'd finish repairing over here, I'd run down here, I'd repair this, and then I'd be attacked down here. And I was just like running, and then up here and down and everywhere. It's just an absolute nightmare. So, what I always do in a situation when I'm panicked into that sort of process, it just gets me all head up. It gets me antagonized. So I just switched the whole factory off. That's what I did. I switched the whole factory off, and then I could concentrate on doing the things that I needed to do to combat the situation that I'd found myself in. Because really, what we're talking about here is the consequences of my past decisions. I've made a big factory, and a big factory is going to make a lot of noise, and that's going to attract biters. If I'd made a smaller factory, it would make less noise, and I wouldn't have so much of a problem. And the bigness of the factory also comes into play with these meteorites. That's another mistake that I made. When I was looking at at this technology tree right at the beginning, I saw these two, and I was like, well, okay, so we get a cheap one at the beginning. I don't really want to go for the cheap one. I want to have the good one. I didn't really build this, and so I've been peppered with meteors, and I've got a big base, so there's got a lot of space, a lot of surface area that this stuff can aim for. This is something that all things considered, I should have built this in my starter factory. To be honest, that's not the only thing I should have built in my starter factory. I should also have built all of the ammo upgrades, because that was something that, the military tech card, I'm not completely sure that I knew that it existed at the beginning when I set up my starter factory. I think that was, but regardless, it was a mistake not to include it, because that was something that I needed, obviously, which when I was analysing my position and turned off this whole factory, that was something that I needed, was to upgrade those turrets so that they could actually stand up for themselves against the biters. So after I'd turned off the whole factory, I kind of regrouped and was like, right, okay, what am I going to do? How do I get out of this situation? And first, the steps were to firstly set up some sort of military tech card in my starter base, which I did. It was a very small one, but it got the job done so that I could slowly upgrade the speed of my ammo and my turrets. Secondly, I wanted to expand the base. So everything originally we were in here, and I've gone out of touch. I was in here. I think I was in here somewhere, and up here. I think this line here is where my perimeter wall used to be. So I've just went and got some more land, and then once I'd done all that and moved the biters away from me, the only thing that I could do was to build myself out of trouble. And, you know, I wasn't really planning on building all of the rocket launch stuff and all the science stuff in this episode. I was just planning on finishing the shopping mall, pottering about, and ending the episode there. But because I couldn't really end the episode with, you know, talking to the mic like this now and having my perimeter wall being attacked left, right, and centre. You know, and they were getting in occasionally. You know, I couldn't... And I would have been all stressed out and anxious. So instead of ending the episode where I wanted to end it, I've built all of this space rocket stuff and science stuff so that I can research all of the little bits and pieces that I need. You know, this is really the last stage of the process that I can see on the tech tree. You know, I've been looking at the tech tree for a while, trying to plan out how I want to do this. And, you know, these are all the sciences that I can see. These are all the sciences that, as far as I'm aware, I have access to. But, you know, in setting it out, I am a little bit anxious about future progression. You know, this science, it feels like it's a bit of a dead end, number one. You know, a lot of this science is going to get us to a particular point and then we won't need it anymore. But also, two, it feels like it goes into a lot of these processes later on. Like, we still need it quite deep into the game. And this is quite a cocktail of science ingredients to try and feed to single, you know, labs. So I've tried to build this kind of science and rocket setup in such a way that I can upgrade it as and when I need to. Because, you know, this is technically what I've tried to do is put it in a corner. You know, what I've got here and up here is a load of space where I can bring in more conveyor belts to make more science stuff. If we think about the factory architecture, the block can come out, really is going to come out to about here. You know, so I've only really occupied about half the space of the block that I'm going to have available to me at one point in the future when I get there. So I've tried to, and the sciences, I've got 6 sciences that I'm making here. I've split them onto belts so that I've got 3 belts with 1 science on either side. And I'm going to try and put this somewhere that's easy to access for more science. You know, if I put the labs in here, for example, then hopefully any other science that I've got in the rest of this block can feed its way down. Now, I've tried to build this in such a way that I've got that future progression, but really, I've just got no idea whether this is the right way to go or not. There's a big part of me that feels like this could just be a temporary setup that I'm going to have to revisit in the future. I don't know, but you know, for the purposes of this moment, it's going to get the job done. And that, you know, I can't. There's how much of this I can actually plan. You know, at this point in time, there is a very real limit to how much of this I can actually think through in my head. So, what we're going to do now is I'm just going to wait a little while whilst the conveyor belts fill up, and then I'm going to end the episode in a slightly different way, a way I haven't done before. So I'm just going to end. I'm going to filter all of the ingredients in. I'm going to set off a few rockets, and then I'm going to end on the time lapse. Whereas normally I would speak to you and end on the episode with me talking, but I think I want to get the rocket launch done so that the next episode we're good to go on the next steps. So that's the plan. I hope it's been good. See you next time.